You know that feeling when you're staring at 4 different bills spread out on your kitchen table and your brain just short circuits trying to figure out which one to attack first? Your credit card is sitting at 24% interest, your car loan is at 7%, your student loan is at 5%, and you've got maybe $200 extra this month to throw at something. So what do? If you're like most people, you either panic and sprinkle a little bit toward everything, which barely moves any of them, or you pick the smallest balance because paying it off feels satisfying, even though it's the one costing you the least to ignore. Here's the thing almost nobody tells you. There's an actual optimal order for paying off debt, and it has almost nothing to do with which balance feels the best to wipe out. Get this order wrong, and you could spend years longer in debt than you needed to, and hand over thousands of extra dollars in interest for absolutely nothing. My name is Sammy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, debt, and why smart people keep attacking their bills in exactly the wrong sequence. If you're tired of conflicting advice about debt payoff and just want the actual optimal order laid out step by step, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up saving you years of unnecessary interest payments. Now, before we get into the sequence itself, let me explain why order matters so much here. Think about it like emergency room triage. When multiple patients come in at once, doctors don't treat whoever complains the loudest or whoever walked in first. They treat whoever is bleeding out fastest. Your debts work the exact same way. Some of them are bleeding you dry at 24% a year. Others are barely nicking you at 4 or 5%. But most people treat every debt like it's an equal emergency, throwing scattered attention at all of them, instead of triaging based on what's actually doing the damage. That one decision, treating every debt the same instead of triaging by severity, is probably costing the average person more money than almost any other financial mistake they'll make this decade.
Here's why getting the order wrong is so expensive. Every month you spend paying down a 5% student loan aggressively while your 24% credit card sits there compounding, you're actively losing money compared to doing it the other way around. It's not a small difference either. On a $5,000 balance, the gap between 5% and 24% interest adds up to hundreds of dollars a year, every year, for as long as that imbalance continues. Multiply that across years of misallocated payments, and you're talking about thousands of dollars that just evaporated because of sequencing, not because you didn't pay enough or work hard enough. And here's the part that makes this even more urgent than most people realize. Credit card interest usually compounds daily, not annually. That 24% isn't just quietly ticking upward once a year at some distant renewal date, it's compounding every single day. Which means the longer a high-interest balance sits untouched, the faster it snowballs against you, not for you. This is exactly why triage order matters so much more with debt than it does with almost any other financial decision you'll make. A wound that's actively getting worse by the hour needs attention before one that's stable.
Let me introduce you to someone I'll call Maria, because her situation is basically the textbook example of what most people are dealing with. Maria has $6,000 in credit card debt at 24%, an $8,000 car loan at 7%, and $15,000 in student loans at 5%. She's got $400 extra each month after minimums, and like most people, her instinct is to split it evenly across all three, roughly $130 toward each one. It feels fair. It feels responsible. It is mathematically one of the worst ways she could possibly allocate that money. We're going to come back to Maria throughout this video and show you exactly what happens when she follows the correct order instead, and the difference is honestly staggering. So let's get into the actual order, step by step, starting with something that surprises almost everyone. Step 1 isn't attacking debt at all. It's building a small starter buffer first. I know that sounds backwards. You've got debt screaming at you, and I'm telling you to sock away cash instead of throwing it at your balances. But here's why this matters. If you go all in on debt payoff with zero cushion, and then your car breaks down or you get hit with a surprise medical bill, what happens? You put it right back on the credit card you were just working so hard to pay off. You're not making progress. You're running on a treadmill, sprinting hard and ending up exactly where you started. A starter buffer of around $1,000 breaks that cycle before it starts. It's not your full emergency fund.
It's just enough padding so a flat tire doesn't undo 3 months of discipline. For Maria, this means her first move isn't touching any of her 3 debts at all. It's parking that $400 a month into a separate savings account for about 2.5 months until she hits her $1,000 buffer. Only then does the real triage begin.
Step 2 is where most people go wrong immediately, and it's simply this. List every single debt you have with its interest rate and minimum payment sitting right next to it. Not the balance size, the interest rate. This is the step people skip because staring at a spreadsheet of your debts is uncomfortable, but you cannot triage what you haven't diagnosed. Once you've got that list, you're choosing between 2 competing strategies, and this is where the internet gets loud and confusing. The debt avalanche method has you pay minimums on everything and throw every extra dollar at the highest interest rate debt first. Mathematically, this is the optimal choice every single time. The debt snowball method has you pay off the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate, for the psychological win of crossing something off the list. Here's the honest truth about these 2 approaches. The avalanche method will save you more money, full stop. If Maria uses the avalanche method, she attacks that $6,000 credit card balance first with everything she's got, and she'll be debt-free across all 3 balances roughly 7 months faster than if she'd used the snowball method, while paying over $1,100 less in total interest. That's not a rounding error. That's a genuinely life-changing difference for someone living paycheck to paycheck. But if you've tried the avalanche method before and burned out because progress felt invisible, watching a $6,000 balance barely move while your student loan taunts you with how small it already is, the snowball method might actually get you to the finish line because you'll stick with it. The best method is the one you'll actually follow through on. But if you have the discipline for it, avalanche wins the math every time, and that's the default I'd recommend starting with. There's also a hybrid approach some people use, sometimes called the threshold method, where you knock out any genuinely tiny balances first, the ones under $100 or so, just to declutter the list and reduce the number of payments you're juggling, and then switch straight to avalanche for everything remaining. It sacrifices almost nothing mathematically while still giving you 1 or 2 quick wins early on. If Maria had a 4th debt sitting at $80, this is exactly the kind of exception where clearing it first wouldn't meaningfully change her timeline. Now, here's the part that trips almost everyone up. The exception that breaks the rule we just established. If your employer offers any kind of matching contribution on a retirement plan, you contribute enough to get the full match before you finish paying off your debt, even the high-interest stuff. I know this sounds insane. You're carrying a credit card charging you 24%, and I'm telling you to also send money into a retirement account? But employer matching is a guaranteed, instant, 100% return on whatever you put in, up to the match limit. There is no debt on earth, no matter how high the interest rate, that beats a guaranteed doubling of your money on day 1. Let's say your employer matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of your salary, and you make $50,000 a year. Contributing $3,000 gets you an extra $1,500 for free. That's not investment return, that's not market performance, that's just free money sitting there waiting for you to claim it. If Maria's employer offers this kind of match, she carves out whatever monthly contribution is needed to capture it in full, even while her credit card debt is still bleeding her at 24%, because that instant 50% return beats any interest rate she's paying by a wide margin. So the actual order is build your starter buffer, contribute enough to capture the full employer match, and then pivot everything else toward debt. One quick caveat here. Some employer plans have vesting schedules, meaning you need to stay at the company a certain number of years before that matched money is actually yours. If you know you're leaving your job soon, it's worth understanding those terms. But for most people, in most situations, capturing the match is still worth doing.
With that out of the way, step 3 is the annihilation phase. And this is where the avalanche method really earns its name. Every extra dollar beyond minimums goes toward the debt with the highest interest rate, almost always credit card debt. Let's run real numbers so you can see why this phase deserves this much focus. Say you're carrying $6,000 in credit card debt at 24% interest, making only minimum payments. At that rate, you'd be paying for years and handing over more in interest than the original amount you borrowed. Now imagine you redirect an extra $300 a month toward that balance, instead of spreading it thin across everything.
you'd wipe it out in under 2 years and save yourself thousands of dollars in interest that would have otherwise just evaporated into your credit card company's profits. For Maria specifically, once her buffer is built and her employer match is captured, that remaining $400 goes entirely at her $6,000 credit card balance. She clears it in under a year and a half instead of dragging it out for years while her student loan and car loan quietly plod along on autopilot. This is the debt equivalent of stopping the bleeding first. Every dollar you send toward high-interest debt is essentially earning you a guaranteed return equal to that interest rate, which in the case of a 24% credit card beats almost every legitimate investment you could make with that same dollar.
Once your high-interest debt is gone, you move to step 4, the moderate interest tier. This is where things like auto loans and some student loans live, typically somewhere in the 5 to 9% range. Here's where the strategy shifts slightly. These debts don't demand the same urgency as a 24% credit card, but they're also not free money sitting in your pocket either. The question becomes whether accelerating these payments beats simply investing that extra money instead. As a general rule, if the interest rate on the debt is lower than what you could reasonably expect from long-term investing, somewhere around 7 to 8% on average, it can make sense to split the difference. Pay these debts as agreed and start directing extra funds into an emergency fund and retirement contributions instead of aggressively steamrolling every last dollar of moderate interest debt. Once Maria's credit card is gone, that freed up $400 plus her old credit card minimum payment now has options. She could throw all of it at her 7% car loan, or she could split it between the car loan and building her full emergency fund and investing. Given her car loan sits right around that market average return threshold, splitting the difference is a completely reasonable call. This is the tier where personal preference actually matters more than pure math. Some people sleep better being completely debt-free, and that peace of mind is worth something the spreadsheet can't capture. Others would rather let the moderate debt ride while their money compounds elsewhere. Neither answer is wrong, but understand you're making a choice, not following a rule. Student loans deserve a special note here too, because they're not all created equal. Federal student loans often come with income-driven repayment plans, deferment options, and even forgiveness programs depending on your career path, which means aggressively paying these down isn't always the obvious move, especially if the interest rate is low and you might qualify for forgiveness down the road. Private student loans don't come with any of those protections, so they behave much more like a standard installment loan and should be evaluated purely on their interest rate, like anything else in this tier. Know which type you're holding before you decide how aggressively to attack it. Now, let's talk about what happens the moment you become debt-free, because this is where a shocking number of people undo all their progress. You've just spent months, maybe years, redirecting hundreds of dollars a month toward debt payoff. The temptation, the second that debt disappears, is to let that money quietly absorb back into your lifestyle. Suddenly, you're eating out more, upgrading things you didn't need to upgrade, and 6 months later, you can't figure out where all that freed up cash went. Don't let this happen. The moment a debt is paid off, that exact payment amount should be redirected immediately, either into your emergency fund if it's not fully built yet, or straight into investment if it is. When Maria finally clears her last balance, that entire monthly amount she'd been sending toward debt for the better part of 2 years doesn't just quietly dissolve into takeout orders and impulse purchases. It walks straight into her emergency fund until she hits 3 to 6 months of expenses, and then straight into an investment account after that. She already proved she can live without that money every month. The only thing that needs to change is where it goes, not whether it exists. Let's talk about the mistakes people make when they get this order wrong, because I see the same patterns constantly. The biggest one is treating every dollar amount equally regardless of interest rate, throwing $100 at a $500 balance charging 6%, while a $3,000 balance charging 24% just sits there compounding. It feels productive because a number went down, but mathematically it's almost the worst possible allocation of that money. It's the equivalent of a triage nurse bandaging a paper cut while someone across the room is bleeding out. The second mistake is ignoring employer matching entirely while aggressively paying off debt, leaving free money on the table because paying off debt feels more urgent, even when it's mathematically inferior. The third mistake, and this one is sneaky, is going straight into debt payoff with zero buffer
then getting blindsided by a car repair or medical bill and putting it right back on the card you just paid down. That's not a moral failure, that's a sequencing failure, and it's exactly why step 1 existed in the first place. And the fourth mistake, the one that catches people right at the finish line, is treating debt freedom as the end goal instead of the beginning of something bigger. Getting to zero isn't the prize. What you do with that freed up money the day after is where the actual wealth building starts. There's a fifth mistake worth mentioning too, and it's one that sounds like a solution but often makes things worse: jumping straight into a balance transfer card or a debt consolidation loan without doing the math first. These tools can genuinely help in the right situation, but a lot of people transfer a balance to a new 0% card, feel a rush of relief, and then rack the original card back up because the underlying spending problem never got addressed. The card is never the actual issue, the behavior is. Consolidation without a plan just resets the clock on the same mistake.
So here's the actual order laid out one more time. Build a small starter buffer of around $1,000. Capture your full employer match if one is available. Attack your highest interest debt with everything you've got using the avalanche method. Handle moderate interest debt with a mix of steady payments and parallel saving or investing. And the second any debt disappears, redirect that exact payment into your financial future instead of letting it dissolve into your lifestyle. Follow this sequence and you're not just getting out of debt, you're building the exact same discipline and habits that will carry you into real wealth once the debt is gone. The people who struggle with money forever aren't usually the ones who made one bad purchase. They're the ones who never had a clear order to follow, so they spent years throwing money at whatever felt urgent instead of whatever actually mattered. Get the order right, and debt stops being this permanent fog hanging over every financial decision you make. It becomes a problem with an actual, calculable end date. And once you hit that date, like Maria eventually does, you're not just debt-free. You're someone who has already proven they can direct their money with intention, which is the exact skill that builds everything that comes next.
There's one more thing worth saying before you close this video and go build your own list. The order matters, but so does starting. I've talked to people who spent months paralyzed trying to decide between Avalanche and Snowball, agonizing over spreadsheets, waiting for the perfect plan before making a single extra payment. Meanwhile, their 24% credit card kept compounding every single day they waited. An imperfect plan you actually follow will always beat a perfect plan sitting in a notes app untouched. So take 20 minutes today, list out what you owe and at what rate, figure out where your starter buffer stands, and send your very next extra dollar toward the debt that's bleeding you the fastest. You don't need to have the whole journey mapped out before you take the first step. You just need to stop guessing and start triaging.